In an unprecedented move that has sent ripples through the nation's capital and beyond, President Donald Trump has declared a crime emergency in Washington, D.C., ordering the federalization of the Metropolitan Police Department and deploying National Guard troops to the city. The dramatic escalation of federal intervention, effective as of Tuesday, August 12, 2025, comes despite official data indicating a significant decline in crime rates, sparking a fierce debate over the administration's motivations and the potential implications for local governance across the United States. The deployment of National Guard troops, a sight not seen in the Capitol since the January 6, 2021 events, began early Tuesday morning with members gathering at the D.C. Armory's Joint Force Headquarters. This federal surge follows President Trump's directive to place the D.C. police under federal control. A decision that has been met with a mix of pragmatic acceptance and staunch condemnation from local and state leaders. Attorney General Pam Bondi convened a meeting with D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser, D.C. Police Chief Pamela Smith, FBI Director Kash Patel, and other top Justice Department and federal law enforcement officials to outline the operational specifics of this federal takeover. However, the administration's stated rationale, that crime in D.C. is out of control, stands in stark contrast to readily available data. The Washington Post, citing official figures, reported that violent crime in the nation's capital had hit a 30-year low in early January and has since plummeted an additional 26%. Jillian Snyder, a retired New York City Police Department officer and a current analyst at a downtown Washington, D.C. think tank, expressed her bewilderment to NBC News, noting, "You couldn't walk down 14th Street or 16th Street near the White House without seeing a lot of disorder, a lot of homeless encampments. Today it's much cleaner. You feel much safer." This sentiment was echoed by a half-dozen policing and military experts who told NBC News they were perplexed by the president's decision. D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser, while calling the federal takeover unsettling and unprecedented on Monday, adopted a more conciliatory tone following her meeting with Attorney General Bondi. She emphasized a focus on the federal surge and how to make the most of the additional officer support that we have. Bowser stated to reporters, "How we got here or what we think about the circumstances right now, we have more police and we want to make sure we're using them," signaling a pragmatic approach to integrate the new resources rather than engage in direct confrontation. D.C. resident Denise Rucker-Krept, a Democrat, acknowledged the city's crime problem but expressed skepticism about the efficacy of a short-term military presence, arguing, "You can tell people not to commit crimes, you can arrest them, but you do not prosecute them, then nothing happens." The federalization of D.C. police, made possible by the unique constitutional powers the federal government holds over the nation's capital, has ignited fears among Democratic mayors nationwide that Washington could serve as a petri dish for similar interventions in other major blue cities. President Trump himself escalated these concerns by citing Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, Baltimore, and Oakland as bad cities, with White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller controversially tweeting, "Crime stats in big blue cities are fake. The real rates of crime, chaos, and dysfunction are orders of magnitude higher." In response, mayors of these predominantly Democratic-led cities, many of whom are black, vehemently rejected the president's rhetoric and any potential federal interference. Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson stated that sending in the National Guard would only serve to destabilize our city and undermine our public safety efforts. Baltimore Mayor Brandon Scott countered, "When it comes to public safety in Baltimore, he should turn off the right-wing propaganda and look at the facts. Baltimore is the safest it's been in over 50 years. Oakland Mayor Barbara Lee characterized Trump's portrayal as wrong and based in fear-mongering, while Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass, whose city saw troop deployments earlier this month during protests, dismissed the move as performative and a stunt. California Governor Gavin Newsom warned that Trump will gaslight his way into militarizing any city he wants in America, and Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker asserted the president has absolutely no right and no legal ability to send troops into the city of Chicago. Protesters in D.C. echoed these concerns, with Jim Lardner holding a resist sign calling the crime crisis narrative a made-up phony story to distract attention from a deteriorating economy and other controversies like the Epstein files.
Indeed, the D.C. intervention unfolds against a backdrop of other significant developments.
Hours after the D.C. deployment, President Trump signed an executive order extending the trade truce with China for another 90 days, a move that eases immediate concerns about escalating tariffs but maintains uncertainty.
Simultaneously,
a key consumer price index (CPI) report released today indicated that while overall inflation remained steady in July at a 2.7% year-on-year increase, the core measure, which excludes volatile food and energy prices, climbed to 3.1%, the highest reading since February.
This rise in core inflation is seen by some as reflecting price pressures amid the president's tariffs.
Despite Trump's immediate reaction to the report demanding that Fed Chair Jerome Powell must now lower the rate and threatening a major lawsuit over Fed building costs, the stock market rallied. The S&P 500 index hit a record high, rising nearly 1%, and the Dow Jones Industrial Average jumped 450 points as investors expressed relief that the inflation data might not deter the Federal Reserve from an anticipated September interest rate cut. Meanwhile, the political landscape is also being reshaped by ongoing battles over congressional redistricting, particularly in Texas, where the GOP's plan to pad their majority by up to 5 seats faces fierce opposition. The Democratic National Committee (DNC) and other liberal groups are organizing Fight the Trump Takeover demonstrations in 20 states this Saturday to protest these efforts, with Texas Republicans warning they will call special session after special session until their plan passes.
On the foreign policy front, President Trump is set to hold a high-stakes summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Alaska on Friday to discuss ending the war in Ukraine.
This summit is preceded by virtual meetings tomorrow involving Trump Vice President J.D. Vance, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, and European leaders who are actively working to influence the diplomatic negotiations and ensure security guarantees for Ukraine's territorial integrity. The convergence of these events, the assertive federal intervention in D.C., the ongoing economic pressures, and the contentious political battles, paints a picture of a presidency increasingly willing to exert federal power and challenge traditional norms. The coming weeks will reveal whether the D.C. deployment yields its intended results, if it indeed serves as a precursor for federal action in other cities, and how these domestic and international developments will shape the political discourse leading into the next election cycle. The petri dish of Washington, D.C., as one councilmember put it, is now under intense scrutiny, with its outcomes potentially setting a precedent for federal-local relations across the nation. In a complex geopolitical landscape, the confluence of aggressive trade policies and rapidly evolving technology is reshaping global commerce and information ecosystems, leading to a period of unprecedented uncertainty and unexpected outcomes. Recent developments, from an extended U.S.-China trade truce to the peculiar behavior of a new AI search engine, underscore the volatile dynamics at play, with President Trump's administration at the epicenter of many of these shifts.
A significant focal point remains the ongoing trade relationship between the United States and China.
Following President Trump's executive order extending the tariff truce for another 90 days, pushing negotiations into the fall, a new layer of complexity emerged in the critical semiconductor sector.
China has reportedly urged its domestic companies, particularly for government work, to avoid using NVIDIA H20 processors. This guidance comes hot on the heels of an unusual agreement where both NVIDIA and AMD consented to remit 15% of their revenue from certain AI chip sales in China to the U.S. government, a condition for securing export licenses. Beijing's move, while not an outright ban,
is seen as a direct counter to the U.S. strategy of monetizing AI-related chip sales, and could significantly impede NVIDIA's efforts to recover lost sales in the lucrative Chinese market. This situation contributes to what Zhou Mi, an expert at the Ministry of Commerce-backed Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation, describes as a climate of uncertainty, noting that the Trump administration frequently sends out a range of signals, often through its negotiation tactics and public statements, some of which even contradict each other.
Currently, average U.S. tariffs on goods imported from China stand at a substantial 55%. Beyond China, the administration's sweeping reciprocal tariffs have sent ripples across the globe, impacting diverse industries and prompting varied responses. A striking example unfolded in the gold market. Following a surprise ruling by U.S. Customs and Border Protection (CBP) classifying Swiss 1 kilogram and 100-ounce gold bars as subject to a hefty 39% tariff, the global bullion market was thrown into disarray, causing gold futures to decline by 2.5%. The decision was a significant blow to Switzerland, which dominates the bullion market, with gold exports accounting for over two-thirds of its trade surplus with the U.S. However, President Trump swiftly intervened via social media, declaring gold will not be tariffed. While this statement brought immediate relief, causing gold prices to ease, the Swiss Precious Metals Association (ASFCMP), through its president Christoph Weil, emphasized that only a formal and binding decision will provide the certainty the gold sector and its partners require. This episode highlights the market's sensitivity to policy pronouncements, especially when delivered through informal channels. Switzerland has also faced the 39% levy on other key exports, including luxury watches, chocolate, cheese, and business jets, with Swiss pharmaceutical giants Roche and Novartis also bracing for potential tariffs on their U.S. operations. Other nations are likewise navigating the turbulent waters of U.S. trade policy. India, for instance, has been hit with an additional 25% tariff, bringing the total to 50% due to its continued purchase of Russian oil. This move, which Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi called unjustified, has led state-owned Indian refiners to pause spot purchases of Russian crude, impacting global oil markets. In Europe, the European Union is still awaiting a joint statement and executive orders from the White House regarding a framework trade agreement reached in late July, with only a 15% baseline tariff on European exports currently in effect. The alcohol industry, in particular, has warned that a 15% tariff on EU goods could jeopardize nearly $2 billion in sales and 25,000 jobs. Japan, while seeing its Nikkei 225 hit a record high on eased tariff fears and a tech rally, has also experienced significant impacts, with Toyota warning of a nearly $10 billion hit from potential car tariffs and Honda reporting a 50% drop in Q1 operating profit, partly due to tariffs. Despite some relief, with the U.S. confirming an end to stacking of universal tariffs and cuts to car levies for Japan, confusion persists over the implementation details. Meanwhile, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has been working to mend ties with Mexico as both nations brace for U.S. tariff fallout, while also assessing opportunities to remove countertariffs against the U.S. Domestically, the effects of these protectionist policies are beginning to manifest. Small U.S. businesses, responsible for over half of the country's job creation, are grappling with the financial strain of higher import costs, facing an estimated $202 billion annual hit. Goldman Sachs analysts predict that U.S. consumers will ultimately bear the brunt of rising prices, adding further uncertainty to the Treasury market. Companies like Under Armour are already forecasting downbeat quarterly sales, citing tariff uncertainty as a contributing factor. Despite these concerns, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick projects the U.S. expects to collect an astounding $50 billion per month in tariff revenue, while President Trump has publicly boasted that billions of dollars will now flow into the United States from countries he claims have exploited the nation for years. In a parallel yet equally significant development, the intersection of technology and political discourse is being tested on Truth Social, the social media platform co-founded by President Trump. The platform recently launched Truth Search AI, a new answer bot powered by Perplexity's Sonar API. Designed to provide direct, contextually accurate answers with transparent citations. Despite initial tests by Axios suggesting its sources were curated to traditionally conservative outlets like FoxNews.com and FoxBusiness.com, the AI tool has surprisingly contradicted some of President Trump's long-held claims. In an analysis by the Washington Post, Truth Search AI reportedly countered statements made by the president, including those concerning the impact of international tariffs on American consumers and the severity of crime in the nation's capital. This unexpected behavior led George Washington University professor David Karp to quip, "Their own AI is now being too woke for them." This phenomenon directly challenges President Trump's broader criticism of what he terms woke AI, large language models he believes are ideologically biased and driven by diversity equity.
and inclusion DEI, a concern he recently addressed with an executive order aimed at promoting unbiased AI in federal contracting and national security. Ironically, this comes as the administration has also brokered significant deals with major AI companies including OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, and Elon Musk on xAI for Pentagon contracts. As President Trump's administration continues to wield tariffs as a primary economic tool and as new technologies like AI become increasingly integrated into public information spheres, the global economy and political discourse are entering uncharted territory. The intricate dance between protectionism and technological advancement ensures that businesses, governments, and citizens alike must remain agile, adapting to rapidly shifting policies and the evolving nature of information itself. The coming months will undoubtedly reveal further complexities as these powerful forces continue to shape the future. Washington, D.C. finds itself at the epicenter of a political and public safety maelstrom this week as President Donald Trump's administration moved decisively to assert federal control over the nation's capital, deploying National Guard troops and placing the city's police department under federal authority. The dramatic intervention announced by President Trump on Monday, August 11, 2025, has ignited a fierce debate over local autonomy, the perception of crime, and the limits of presidential power. President Trump, flanked by Attorney General Pam Bondi, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, and the FBI Director, declared a public safety emergency in Washington, D.C., stating his intention to take our capital back from what he described as violent gangs and bloodthirsty criminals and drugged-out maniacs and homeless people. His order activates 800 members of the National Guard and tasks approximately 500 federal law enforcement officers, including agents from the FBI, ATF, DEA, ICE, and the Marshals Service, with patrolling the city. The president cited Section 740 of the District of Columbia Home Rule Act as the legal basis for his actions, which allows for presidential control of the city's police force under special conditions of an emergency nature. While the president did not provide a timeline for federal control, the statute limits such an intervention to 30 days unless Congress provides approval. However, local D.C. officials have vehemently rejected the president's premise, asserting that no such crime emergency exists. Mayor Muriel Bowser, a Democrat, described Trump's actions as unsettling and unprecedented. And District of Columbia Attorney General Brian Schwalb went further, calling them unprecedented, unnecessary, and unlawful. Both officials presented data contradicting the president's narrative, noting that violent crime in the district reached historic 30-year lows last year and has seen a further 26% reduction this year. Homicides specifically dropped by 32% between 2023 and 2024, reaching their lowest level since 2019, with an additional 12% drop recorded this year. Mayor Bowser suggested that the president's perception might be colored by the challenging times of the coronavirus pandemic, when crime briefly spiked. Beyond crime, a significant focus of the president's declaration was the issue of homelessness. Trump stated the homeless have to move out immediately, adding, "We will give you places to stay, but far from the capital." He also pledged to get rid of the slums, without offering specific details on relocation plans or support. This aspect of the plan has drawn sharp criticism from homeless advocates. Jesse Rabinowitz, campaign and communication director for the National Homelessness Law Center, decried the plan as fascist and a waste of resources, arguing it's about power and it is about fascism and authoritarianism rather than genuine safety. Ralph Boyd, president and CEO of So Others Might Eat Some, a local organization, noted that homelessness among individuals in D.C. has actually decreased by almost 20% over the past 5 years, emphasizing that simply moving people elsewhere is not a long-term solution but merely transfers the problem to potentially less equipped communities. The intervention underscores the unique and often contentious relationship between the federal government and Washington, D.C., which is the only U.S. city not part of any state, lacks full self-governance. Protesters quickly gathered outside the White House chanting "Hands off D.C." and "Protect Home Rule," reflecting deep-seated concerns over the erosion of the city's autonomy. Critics, including Democratic House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, have questioned the legality and motivation behind the move, suggesting it serves a personal and political agenda. The situation also presents a notable contrast to President Trump's past actions, such as his pardon of over 1,500 individuals charged in the January 6, 2021 U.S. Capitol riot, including some convicted of assaulting police officers, even as he now champions a tough-on-crime stance. This marks the second instance of President Trump deploying the National Guard to a major U.S. city during his term, following a deployment to Los Angeles in June to address unrest over undocumented migrant raids. As the National Guard troops begin to arrive in the capital, the immediate future remains uncertain. Legal challenges to the president's executive order are widely anticipated, and the duration of federal control hinges on potential congressional approval, which is far from guaranteed given the strong opposition from Democratic lawmakers and D.C. officials. The ongoing tension between federal authority and local self-determination in the District of Columbia is likely to intensify, further fueling the long-standing debate over D.C. statehood and the city's right to govern itself without such interventions. The coming days will reveal whether this aggressive federal push yields its intended results or merely exacerbates the political divide surrounding the nation's capital. The American economy finds itself at a precarious crossroads as new data released this Tuesday reveals consumer prices continued their ascent in July, a trend economists increasingly attribute to the far-reaching impact of President Donald Trump's international tariffs. The latest figures paint a picture of turbulence, challenging assertions of a robust economy and placing immense pressure on key financial institutions. According to the Consumer Price Index (CPI), which tracks a broad basket of goods and services, prices were 2.7% higher last month compared to a year ago. While the overall inflation rate held steady between June and July, core inflation, a crucial measure that strips out the volatile food and energy sectors, surged by 3.1% over the last month, a notably faster pace than observed in June. Specific sectors saw even steeper increases, with prices for takeout and restaurants jumping 3.9% over the past year, contributing to an overall 2.9% rise in food costs. Housing, used cars, and medical care also experienced significant price hikes, outpacing the general inflation rate. The only notable counterweight came from overall energy prices, which were down 1.6% for the year, likely providing some stabilization to the broader inflation pace. This latest report serves as a stark indication that the Trump administration's sweeping re-evaluation of U.S. trading policy is beginning to translate into higher costs for American consumers. Although many of the more stringent tariffs, including those on China, only went into effect on August 7, the president's 10% universal tariff alongside higher duties on industries like steel and aluminum have been active since spring. Economists have consistently warned that tariffs take time to manifest in consumer prices as retailers initially absorb costs or negotiate with suppliers. However, the recent jump suggests that companies as leaders from Walmart, Nike, and Macy's had predicted are now beginning to pass these increased expenses directly onto customers. The economic turbulence extends beyond just consumer prices, casting a shadow over the labor market as well. Data released earlier this month saw dramatic revisions to previously reported job figures, painting a far less optimistic picture than initially presented. The government had initially reported 291,000 jobs added in May and June, but a significant revision brought that total down to a mere 33,000, indicating that tariffs have hit employment harder than anticipated. This dual challenge of rising prices and a shrinking labor market has thrust the U.S. Federal Reserve into an unenviable position. Tasked with the twin mandate of maximizing employment while maintaining price stability, the central bank faces a delicate balancing act. President Trump has relentlessly pressured the Fed to cut interest rates, arguing it would spur growth. However, Fed officials, including Chairman Jerome Powell, have largely refrained from making adjustments, citing significant uncertainty regarding the full impact of the tariffs on prices and the broader economy. Federal Reserve Governor Chris Waller has suggested tariffs might cause a one-time price jump rather than sustain inflation, but Powell has cautioned that the central bank must guard against the risk of more persistent inflationary pressures. Despite this, investors, as indicated by the CME FedWatch tool, are currently pegging an 86% chance of a quarter percentage point rate cut at the Fed's next policy meeting in September, reflecting market sentiment regarding the need to stimulate a slowing economy. Adding another layer of complexity to this economic narrative are President Trump's unprecedented public attacks on economic institutions and officials. For months, his ire has been directed at the Federal Reserve and, more recently, at the Bureau of Labor Statistics (BLS). Just hours after July's sluggish job growth figures were released, Trump controversially fired Erica McIntyre for the BLS commissioner and, without providing evidence, claimed the job figures were rigged. He has since nominated E.J. Antoni, a vocal critic of the BLS, to oversee the department. Following the latest inflation figures, the president doubled down on his narrative, claiming on Truth Social that it has been proven that even at this late stage, tariffs have not caused inflation or any other problems for America other than massive amounts of cash pouring into our Treasury's coffers. He also reiterated his attacks on Fed Chair Jerome Powell, even suggesting a potential lawsuit over costly renovations to Fed buildings, demanding Powell now lower the rate. The confluence of elevated prices, a weakening labor market, and a period of relatively modest GDP growth, 1.2% over the first half of 2025, down from 2.8% a year prior, raises the specter of stagflation, a challenging scenario where the economy slows while prices continue to rise. Such a situation would present the Federal Reserve with an agonizing dilemma: raising interest rates to combat tariff-induced inflation risks stifling economic growth further, while lowering rates to stimulate the economy could exacerbate inflationary pressures. As the U.S. economy navigates this complex confluence of rising prices, a tightening labor market, and unprecedented political intervention in economic institutions, the path forward remains fraught with uncertainty, with the next moves by the Federal Reserve and the continued evolution of trade policy poised to significantly shape the nation's economic trajectory. In a series of rapid-fire developments signaling a dramatic shift in federal domestic policy, the Trump administration has moved to assert unprecedented control over civil order, sparking widespread concern over civil liberties and the balance of power. This week saw the declaration of a public safety emergency in Washington, D.C., the deployment of federal forces, and the revelation of plans for a standing military reaction force to address civil unrest nationwide, all unfolding against a backdrop of escalating political and economic tensions. The immediate focus has been on the nation's capital, where President Trump declared a public safety emergency on Monday, August 11, 2025, initiating a federal takeover of the Metropolitan Police Department (MPD) under Section 740 of the D.C. Home Rule Act of 1973. Concurrently, 800 National Guard members were deployed to the city. The president justified these actions by citing a startling rise in crime, referencing inflammatory statistics from 2023. However, this narrative starkly contrasts with official data. The Washington Post reported that violent crime in D.C. has been on a decline since 2023, with a 35% drop in 2024, according to the Metropolitan Police Department, mirroring a nationwide trend of plummeting homicide rates. Even Fox News, ahead of the announcement, had its contributor Ted Williams, a former member of the Washington Metropolitan Police Department, clarify that crime is not out of control in the District of Columbia, warning against using crime as a pretext to eradicate home rule. The federal presence quickly translated into tangible changes on the ground for D.C. residents. Videos posted online depicted federal law enforcement officers, including U.S. Park Police and DEA agents, patrolling public areas and engaging in what many described as harassment of ordinary civilians. One viral Reddit video showed a Park Police officer confronting men smoking cigarettes on a stoop, demanding ID and warning them that Donald Trump's tired of it, implying a broad federal crackdown on quality-of-life offenses. This aggressive posture, with agents from FBI to Park Police out in force, prompted concerns that the deployment was less about crime prevention and more about enforcing an authoritarian vision. Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser, while expressing a commitment to prevent a complete disaster, offered a notably mild response to the federal takeover, a stark contrast to her previous strong condemnations of similar proposals.
She stated her intention to work every day to make sure it's not a complete disaster and downplayed the extent of federal control over the MPD even as the administration asserted the opposite.
Beyond the immediate D.C. situation, a more profound and potentially long-lasting shift in federal domestic security strategy is underway. The Washington Post revealed on August 12, 2025, that the Pentagon and President Trump are actively considering the creation of a full-time domestic civil disturbance quick reaction force. This proposed force, comprising approximately 600 National Guard troops, would be based in military facilities in Alabama and Arizona, ready to deploy in waves of 100 soldiers to any city or state experiencing civil unrest or protest. Equipped with military-style weapons and riot gear, these units would cycle out every 90 days to prevent burnout. The plan envisions primarily utilizing Title 32, a federal code that allows the Guard to operate with expanded powers, including the authority to make arrests under federal funding, significantly broadening their role beyond traditional support functions.
This mirrors Trump's invocation of Title 32 during the 2020 Black Lives Matter protests.
The Pentagon's internal documents themselves reportedly acknowledge concerns regarding the program's cost, logistics, reduced National Guard availability, and significant public and political impact. Experts echoed these worries, with Brennan's Center for Justice lawyer Joseph Nunn stating, "You don't want to normalize routine military participation in law enforcement. You don't want to normalize routine domestic deployment." Carter Elliott, spokesman for Maryland Governor Wes Moore, further criticized the administration for blatantly and dangerously ignoring well-established procedures for requesting assistance during times of need. The proposed force, if approved and following traditional budgetary processes, would begin in 2027, costing hundreds of millions, though the possibility of the administration attempting to accelerate its implementation remains. This initiative is seen by critics as a deliberate effort to weaponize the military and mold the National Guard into a private militant police force directly under presidential command,
often predicated on manufacturing emergencies and inflating crime numbers.
The aggressive moves in D.C. and the reaction force proposal are not isolated incidents, but appear to be part of a broader pattern of the administration asserting executive power and challenging established norms. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's evasive response to Fox News regarding the duration of the D.C. occupation, stating "who knows," when pressed on time limits, underscored the administration's apparent disregard for legal constraints, including the Posse Comitatus Act of 1878, which generally prohibits the military from civilian law enforcement duties. Hegseth's comments were even admitted as evidence in a California courtroom where a trial challenging the legality of Trump's June deployment of National Guard troops against Los Angeles protesters is underway. This climate of heightened executive action extends beyond law enforcement.
President Trump has also escalated his conflict with Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, threatening a lawsuit over a multi-billion-dollar renovation project at the Fed headquarters, accusing Powell of fraud. This comes after Trump fired the Bureau of Labor Statistics Commissioner Erica McIntyre for what he deemed poor July jobs numbers and appointed E.J. Antoni, a Heritage Foundation economist known for criticizing BLS methodology and asserting that tariffs by definition cannot be inflationary. This move amidst rising inflation attributed to Trump's wild tariff policies suggests an effort to manipulate economic data to paint a more favorable picture of the economy. Concurrently, the political landscape is witnessing further erosion of democratic checks and balances. In Texas,
the Republican Party has involved the Department of Public Safety in a controversial effort to locate and compel Democratic state lawmakers who fled the state to prevent a vote on a gerrymandering bill. Speaker Dustin Burrows announced a tip line for citizens to report the lawmakers' whereabouts, promising to keep receipts for every gallon of gas every mile traveled and hold the absent Democrats financially responsible. This unprecedented use of a public safety office for partisan political ends highlights a worrying trend of weaponizing state apparatus. The growing public discontent was evident in a recent town hall in Chico, California, where Representative Doug LaMalfa faced furious constituents demanding impeachment, decrying fascism in America, and expressing concerns over cuts to social programs, economic policies, and the militarization of the government. As the nation navigates these turbulent waters, the implications of these developments are profound. The federalization of local police. The creation of a standing domestic military force and the politicization of independent government agencies signal a significant challenge to the traditional separation of powers and the protection of civil liberties. The coming months will likely see continued legal battles, heightened political polarization, and a critical examination of the very foundations of American democracy as the administration pushes the boundaries of executive authority. In an increasingly interconnected world, the intricate dance of international relations typically relies on carefully calibrated diplomacy, established alliances, and a nuanced understanding of global power dynamics. Yet under the current U.S. administration, a radical departure from these norms has become the defining characteristic of American foreign policy, raising profound questions about its long-term efficacy and impact on global stability. This unconventional approach, characterized by a heavy reliance on economic leverage and a perceived dismantling of traditional diplomatic infrastructure, is reshaping geopolitical landscapes with potentially generational consequences, even touching upon critical technology sectors like advanced AI chips. At the heart of this shift is President Trump's assertive use of tariffs, transforming them from tools of trade regulation into instruments of diplomatic coercion. This strategy has been prominently deployed in efforts to influence the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. As a crucial summit between President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin looms in Alaska aimed at brokering a ceasefire, European leaders have voiced strong concerns, vehemently defending Ukraine's freedom to determine its own future and stressing that a path to peace cannot be decided without Kiev's direct involvement. The White House has been actively working to end the conflict, with Polish Prime Minister Tusk even suggesting a freeze in the war might be close after discussions with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. However, the unconventional nature of these peace efforts is underscored by President Trump's earlier suggestion that he might allow sales of NVIDIA's advanced AI chips in China, a move that immediately sparked concern among allies and experts, highlighting a willingness to use high-tech economic levers in broader geopolitical negotiations. The administration's use of tariffs extends beyond the Ukraine conflict, notably impacting key partners in Asia. To pressure Russia, President Trump threatened very severe tariffs on its trading partners, a roundabout method aimed at inflicting economic pain on Moscow. This threat materialized dramatically against India, where tariffs on imports were raised to an extraordinary 50%, ostensibly to punish Delhi for continuing to purchase Russian oil. This move, which will inevitably lead to higher costs for American consumers, has plunged U.S.-India relations to their lowest point in decades. This deliberate straining of ties with India, alongside rhetorical challenges to Japan, is seen by many as directly jeopardizing the strategic viability of the Quad, the four-way military pact between Washington, Japan, India, and Australia, which was revived in 2017 specifically to counter Beijing's growing influence in the Indo-Pacific. The opaque rationale behind these actions, likely driven more by domestic political posturing than strategic coherence, has been observed with satisfaction by Beijing, bolstering perceptions among authoritarian regimes that U.S. global leadership is in terminal decline. Beyond economic pressure, the U.S. approach under President Trump has also extended into the political and judicial affairs of other sovereign nations. In a highly unusual move last month, tariffs on Brazilian goods were also raised to 50% with few exceptions. This punitive measure was directly linked to a coup plot case in Brazil's Supreme Court against former right-wing President Jair Bolsonaro, whom President Trump views as an ally. Similarly, the administration has been active in other regions, with President Trump claiming to have reached a historic peace deal between Armenia and Azerbaijan, a development that Iran and Russia stand to lose from. Meanwhile, the U.S. has doubled the reward for the arrest of Venezuela's president to $50 million, and President Trump ordered the military to target Mexican cartels, leading Mexican President Sheinbaum to reject any U.S. invasion. Perhaps the most significant and potentially lasting impact of this foreign policy approach is the perceived generational damage being inflicted upon America's diplomatic capacity itself. While the administration has championed a record $1.01 trillion Defense Department budget for fiscal year 2026, aiming for the strongest military the world has ever seen, this emphasis on hard power has come at the expense of soft power and diplomatic infrastructure.
Following his second inaugural address, President Trump signed an executive order that initiated the dismantling of the U.S. Agency for International Development (USAID) and an ongoing process of diminishing America's diplomatic capabilities.
This includes the recent firing of 1,300 State Department officials following the virtual elimination of all USAID staff, representing a significant divestment in skilled and experienced diplomats crucial for national security.
America's diplomatic presence, once the most robust internationally, is also facing planned cuts to overseas embassies and consulates, further ceding ground to competitors like China.
Diplomatic programs, which constitute a mere 1% of the federal budget but yield outsized returns, are being slashed, from humanitarian aid and market development support to funding for international organizations and public diplomacy initiatives like Voice of America. As the late Harvard scholar Joe Nye observed, America is shedding its soft power, the ability to achieve preferred outcomes through attraction rather than coercion, a trend that only benefits adversaries. As former Secretary of Defense James Mattis famously stated, "If you don't fully fund the State Department, then I need to buy more ammunition," underscoring the vital complementary role of diplomacy in preventing conflicts and sustaining peace. This radical shift in U.S. foreign policy, prioritizing unilateral action and economic leverage over traditional alliances and diplomatic engagement, presents a stark challenge to the existing global order. While President Trump aims to be remembered as a peacemaker and unifier, the current trajectory risks alienating key allies, emboldening rivals, and eroding the very tools that have long underpinned American global influence. The long-term implications of this approach for international cooperation, global stability, and America's standing on the world stage remain uncertain. But the current course suggests a future where diplomacy, as conventionally understood, plays a diminished and increasingly unpredictable role. The question that lingers is whether this disruptive strategy can truly achieve lasting peace and prosperity, or if it simply paves the way for a more fragmented and volatile international landscape.